Okay, boom. Welcome back to the Sports Business Take Podcast, your home for sports industry news with a little personality. I'm Paul Hine. He is Zach Creekmore. How you doing today, Zach?
I'm doing good today, Paul. How are you doing, brother?
I'm great, man. Honestly, I should not be doing this great off of the sleep that I got, but because we had 2 fire alarms last night. We had one at 12 and we had one at 8 a.m.
This wasn't like a genuine test of how you guys are going to do it in a firearm situation. This was somebody actively pulling a fire alarm.
I don't know.
Okay.
Because this morning I just went straight to the gym. I was on my way out the door anyway, so I didn't stick around to see how long it took the fire trucks to get there. I've heard from friends, because I have friends who lived in this building last year, that they had one like every week during the winter last year.
That's crazy. Especially in the winter. It's cold outside. I'm in my underwear.
Yeah, no, I know. But today we are in a new setting. You guys can probably tell I didn't have time to book one of the soundproof recording studios, so you guys get a view of campus. This is the 12th floor common room in my building right now. You can see pretty much the whole campus. It's pretty cool. Did I do a good job with holding the computer in the right spot there? No?
Yes, you did.
Okay.
We lost all audio with your mic.
Really?
Yes.
Am I good now?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so we're in a new setting today. We're feeling good. I got everything done that I need to get done today, and now I get to talk to one of my friends about sports for an hour. I live a great life. You know what I'm saying?
We do.
So we're going to talk about today the Four Nations Hockey Tournament and the state of all-star games in American sports. I think this is a really interesting line of thought to go down. I actually had a similar conversation last night. We recorded the second episode of the McCormick Student Leaders podcast, and that's out on YouTube now under the McCormick Student Leaders channel. So I was very excited to get back to doing that, although we used Adobe Audition instead of Riverside, and I got to say, I don't like it nearly as much as Riverside.
I'll have to check out the Adobe Audition. This sounds interesting.
So that's their audio platform, and we could not figure out for the life of us how to connect the mics to the actual software. The audio was picking up on the computer through the microphones in the studio, because we record in the WMUA, which is the radio station here. We record in their studios, and the mics were not connecting to the actual app Audition. It took us over an hour to figure out how to do it. But we didn't notice that there was a binder of what to do in that situation sitting right above us. So we could have saved ourselves some time with that. But at least now we know how to do it. So definitely, I guess my point of all of that was I already talked about this last night. So it's top of mind for me. So we're a little bit late on the Four Nations tournament and this conversation because it's about a week after it's finished. But it's still relevant because of what it means for both the game of hockey and for American sports. So the NHL created this Four Nations tournament, if you guys don't know what happened, to replace their All-Star game. And in doing so, created a massive success and an international tournament between the U.S., Canada, Finland, and Sweden. And it saw basically a round-robin style tournament and a lot of player buy-in. That was kind of the biggest piece that made it work to me, was a lot of the players really cared about playing for their country and what that meant. You saw in the opening USA-Canada game, Matthew Tkachuk and his brother Brady, and I forget the third guy's name, but there were essentially 3 fights in 9 seconds, in the first 9 seconds of the game. And that draws attention, right? You think about, we live in a world right now where the attention span is 6 seconds a person, right? You're talking about 3 fights in 9 seconds, and that's going to draw some attention these days. So what did you think about the whole tournament overall and why they succeeded?
Yeah, I think it goes down to the strongest point that, we all know I'm a big soccer guy, and that's my strength, and that's where my knowledge comes from. And really, when I think about it, this is just a massive way for sports to grow. Soccer leagues in Europe and even the MLS doesn't really have a quote unquote all-star weekend.
Yeah.
I would say the MLS probably does, but it's the really differently styled, and they play European teams throughout the summer, and that's kind of the MLS all-stars and how that works out.
Yeah.
So
a touring style?
Yeah, a bit more. But I would say I don't really care about the MLS All-Stars or what that is. It doesn't matter to me at all. It doesn't have any impact on how I consume media, nor does it have any impact on what I care about in soccer.
Yeah.
to be honest, right? And then we'll get into that conversation a little bit more with All-Star weekends and their state and kind of what their point and purpose is. So I think what really is cool to me about this is you're connecting with an international audience, one, right? So for NHL, which is a national hockey league, right? But it's solely based in the US, you're trying to connect with different audiences. So you're connecting with those in Finland, you're connecting with those in Sweden. Obviously, you already have that Canadian buy-in because it's a joint country league between the U.S. and Canada. But you're really creating something that's really interesting, and really what I feel like, and what I want to talk about this concept as is how can we create more opportunities for international pride and international play, especially in hockey outside of just the Olympics. And I'm not sure, and I'm sure there's probably other international hockey tournaments, but I don't feel that they're heavily mediaized. I don't feel that they are televised, and I don't feel that they are enough attention is brought to them. And this is a great opportunity for the NHL to bring that attention both to their product, but also their players and to these other countries. So I think this can grow beyond 4 teams and become something a lot larger that'll be a lot more interesting. And that's what I'm really excited about.
To your point, the hype was different, right?
Yes.
People really cared about this tournament, and that reflected in the viewership numbers as well. So they totaled 16.1 million viewers for the final game between USA and Canada. And obviously the border rivalry there makes it kind of obvious why that would be a highly watched game. But it was so much so that it was the second most watched NHL game in the last decade. So you think about that. I mean, this is the first year that they're doing this tournament, right? To have that sort of success in year one is, they really hit the ground running with this concept. They took something of their product, right, the All-Star Weekend, that said, how can we improve this? How can we make this better and more interesting for our fans? Okay, we have a lot of players that are international players, right, because hockey is sort of a like Northern European and Canadian thing as well as U.S. sport. So how do we incorporate the nationality into it, and how do we get people's national pride going? They really did a good job at promoting that in that sense. I think the player buy-in, like I was mentioning earlier, was so much so that, Matthew Tkachuk said that final game, that championship game against Canada, mattered more to him than Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals, like that it felt more important. And that was paraphrasing. But I do think that without the player buy-in, I don't think it has the same effect because
no, absolutely not.
I was talking about this last night on my other podcast, but if you tried this in the NBA, do you think the players buy in? I don't really think so.
And that's a really interesting conversation. And the thing is, I don't know, but I really feel that they buy in a little bit more than they do if it's just All-Star Weekend, because nobody, like, it's so clear no one cares about All-Star Weekend in the NBA.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You like, okay, the only thing that I actively saw from NBA All-Star Weekend was Chris Paul and Victor Wembanyama doing
found a way to game the system.
Right,
exactly.
But they were disqualified anyway, right? So it doesn't matter. That was the only thing I saw from the NBA All-Star Weekend on my socials.
Yeah, me too.
That's crazy, right?
I know.
2 people who are so immensely enamored with sports that it's pretty much everything. It's a lot of what we consume, right? To be honest, right? It's a lot of what we consume.
Like, of content, I would say on my feed, probably 70% is sports.
And I've probably made a shift away from that, but I would still say that I consume a lot of sports content, and I read a lot about sports, and I watch a lot of sports, right? Where, like, that's crazy.
Yeah.
That's nuts to me. And I really, let's be honest here. And I'm not trying to be a hot take, nor am I trying to be mean. They try to do things with it, but no matter what, it's crap. And let's be real, shit content is shit content, and shit content does not do well.
Let's unpack that for a minute. Why do you think it's been so bad for a while? Because it used to be like, obviously we weren't alive during this time, but during the late days of Jordan, early days of Kobe, let's say like early 2000s, we were babies, so we wouldn't remember it. But it was a thriving thing. The NBA All-Star Weekend mattered. They had some gravitas around it. What changed? Like, is it a player buy-in thing? In my opinion, I think it's because they don't play defense anymore. They just let a guy run through them. But what do you think? What do you think needs to be improved about the NBA All-Star Game?
And that's the really challenging thing is I think the NBA All-Star Game is a great concept and was a great concept. My opinion really is that it's kind of ran its course. Just like the NFL All-Star Game has ran its course, and just like the NHL All-Star Game had ran its course. They realized this concept, as much as it was great for the 80s, the 90s, etc., where we have all these big, interesting personalities and all these awesome people that come together, and like it was really what was so cool about the All-Star Weekend is it's a clash of personalities. We're trying to mash all the best players into this team.
It's a matchup you haven't seen before.
Right, it's something you've never seen before, but also it's you playing FIFA, it's you playing Madden, it's you like you, it's that in real life, and that's what's so cool. And people were enamored with that. But people have FIFA, they have Madden, they can do that on their own now, right?
So basically,
they didn't have that as strongly in the 90s.
So basically, what you're saying is it's just kind of outdated now.
I don't think it's outdated, but I think it's a concept that's been done, and it's a concept that needs to be innovated, and it's worth, like the NHL has done here, to try something new and to step away from that. Because really, I see more about the All-Star voting than I do about the actual All-Star game. So I think what you do is you keep the All-Star voting, you make it a Team of the Year type thing, which is really cool. You find a way to match all those personalities in a fun way and congratulate those people and highlight those people, but you also try something new in terms of what you do with that All-Star Weekend spot. Right? The NFL tried and reclassed it because really the reason players aren't buying into it is because they're afraid of injuries and they're not going to invest their time into something worthless just because their bodies are on the line, right? And that's millions of dollars for them if they get injured.
That's all about how you incentivize it, though. I was saying in talking about this topic, I was saying basically for the NFL or the NBA's case, you have to, if you want the players to buy in, you have to incentivize it the right way. And I do think, so they got rid of it. It was either last year or the year before, but in the MLB, they used to do it traditionally that whoever won the All-Star game would get home field advantage for the World Series. I think a non-monetary incentive like that is very smart because, like, let's be honest, these players don't care about the couple $100,000 that they're being paid to participate in All-Star Weekend.
Of course,
they're making millions. That's nothing to them. It doesn't matter, right? But what does matter, if you're on a good team who has a chance to, go to the championship or make the playoffs, is having home field advantage, right? That really does matter. So I think having a non-monetary incentive like that doesn't completely fix the player buy-in, but it certainly helps that problem. I do think the style is different than it used to be in the sense that defense just isn't being played in the All-Star game as much anymore. And we're at a point with basketball in particular where the three-point shot has taken over the game so much that you're kind of just watching the guys do the same thing over and over again during the All-Star game when there's no defense.
Right.
Or when the defenders are just letting people go by them, then it just makes it not interesting. You're tuning in to see the matchups that you wouldn't normally see, and superstars who play with each other or who don't play with each other normally be on the same team.
Right.
But does that matter if they're not facing like real opposition? Do you know what I'm saying?
100%. Right. When it's not really and truthfully competitive, why would I care about it?
Exactly. And the NBA has done things to try to make it different and interesting. Like even this year they switched it up and said, hey, we're going to have a game that's going to be the young stars versus the older veterans of the league. And in itself, in a concept, that's interesting, but they still didn't get fans to care that much about it.
Yeah.
And that really reflected in the numbers of the All-Star game viewership-wise. They dropped 13% this year and only had 4.7 million viewers. When you compare that to what the NHL just did with the Four Nations, it's a quarter of what they had. So I guess we're kind of back to the place where besides a non-monetary incentive, what do you think is the best way to fix NBA All-Star Weekend?
And I think the non-monetary suggestion is great, but I really think the NBA needs to try a new concept here, right? Something where you're pretty much scrapping All-Star Weekend, you're scrapping the skills contest, right? Nobody really cares about that. Nobody is getting on their TV to like, I'm going to go watch Wembanyama pass the ball into a net that's 10 feet away from him. A 5-year-old does that. That's what a 5-year-old does.
Do you keep the
right?
dunk contest?
Keep the dunk contest. The dunk
I
contest
agree.
is fun, but let's be real. Top tier NBA players don't care about the dunk contest, and we know that, and we've known that for a long time.
Has
But
it
we
gotten
want it.
old?
I don't think it's gotten old. No,
Okay.
I think player buy-in isn't there for it, and you don't have your star athletes doing it. But I will say that I love me some Mac McClung, and I love me seeing him jumping over a 7-foot guy and dunking it in the back of the net.
Yeah.
But I have to be real that obviously it's not something that top tier athletes care about, and it's become something that's a bit of a joke. So honestly, if you were to scrap it, I don't think it's the end of the world. It's the end of the story. And it's a bit heartbreaking because obviously there's a lot of great stories that came from the dunk contest. But
Yeah.
like LeBron James isn't going to be part of the dunk contest.
The NBA is definitely in an interesting place right now.
It's an interesting place, mostly because I think the league's culture has totally changed.
Mm-hmm.
Right? The league's culture under the leadership of a Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan, right, as their quote unquote top player, is totally different than the league's culture under a 40-year-old LeBron James as their quote unquote top player, right? His priorities are different. And that I think that leads to a lot of other players to see their priorities as different, right? People who are in influential places influence lots of other people.
How much do you think that culture change has to do with the fact that we have social now?
Great statement.
Because media has evolved so much. Do you think social media has part of the blame in that, or
it's hard to say? I think yes. The only reason I would say yes is because our mediascape has changed so much in itself, and players have the ability to control their own platform so much more. So they're not trying to get in front of eyeballs to get sponsorships. In that way, they have their own media and able to do that, and they have their own media teams and able to do that. They don't need All-Star Weekend for that. So it's a challenging thing and a challenging thought process.
I think we'll see that continue to evolve as well.
Yes.
As NIL, college athletes who are now making their money and knowing their worth at a younger age are taking that knowledge into pro sports when they get drafted, right? Like, I was thinking about the NFL Combine last night and how there are several people opting out of it when they don't necessarily need to. But I was realizing, like, now that they can make money in college and they kind of have access to agents and understand their worth more, it's easier to say, hey, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to try as hard in this because I don't want to injure myself or, hurt my stock or my career.
Right.
In a way that this event is worth doing. So I think that kind of mindset has changed the style of play in all-star games as well as combines, like I just mentioned.
No, very true. And I think that's exactly the point, that players' values have shifted in a bit, and where they're looking at longevity and thinking long term, and their values are important and have changed. So we need to recognize that. And I think a lot of top leagues need to recognize that and see what can we do in this All-Star Weekend space, or what type of competition can we add that actually makes it a bit more interesting.
Yeah.
Possibly you could, like, we recognize, right, the Four Nations style thing does not work for every league. The NBA is
okay. So I'm going to pick this apart because
okay. Yes, go ahead.
I wanted to ask you this question. So you just said it doesn't work for every league. Do you think it works for the NBA if they do it, and do you think it works for the NFL if they tried it? And I have answers for both. So,
do you want to answer first, or do you want me to comment?
You can go.
Okay, so
I'm asking you.
The reality is that I think that the NBA does not have enough international stars where it's going to be interesting and competitive.
They have some Eastern European, maybe,
right? But that's, you would have to combine multiple nations to make a team. Right? Like you could try to do a team, like a European team, right? You could do US versus Europe, which would be super interesting, right? You could probably also do an Asian team, right? So you're going like Australia, China, Japan, right? And you could make something that might be interesting out of that.
I like that concept,
right? If we were to go the Four Nations, you might have to go regionally. Right, so you go like U.S., Europe, Asia, Africa. Right, you make it a very regional.
I really love that. Actually, that makes me think of the Little League World Series.
Right.
You know how they do like the regions and then they kind of whittle it down. I really like that concept actually of like a USA versus Europe game. And we're not at that point, we're talking about national pride, right? Like that's
correct.
That's
But
getting
it's
people's
also,
national
it's
pride
not
up.
so closely connected to one nation, right? So that national pride might
Yeah.
be a bit harder, but you're looking at something that's a bit more similar to like the Ryder Cup. Yeah, so that's the tennis tournament. That's the
Okay.
two international between Europe and the United States. So you're looking at something a bit more similar to that. But I also think that that's not the best direction for the NBA to go, right? I think that the NBA really needs to find a way to add a third tournament to its calendar.
Okay.
So
let's
a
unpack
trophy
that.
behind it, right?
How
Where
would you do that? Because they already have the midseason tournament
right
that they started last year, and they have the finals. So what kind of third tournament would you propose?
So I think this is like a lot of really interesting things where you have the midseason tournament. Let's pick a 10-game period where you pick the 10 the 4 to 8 top performing teams throughout the NBA, and you put them in a weekend tournament, or you put them in a weekend/week long tournament that's kind of more like World Cup-y, right?
Okay.
But it's quarters, semis, final. So you're only
Where
playing.
would you place it within the season?
I would place it during All-Star Weekend.
Okay.
So
okay,
I take
I
like that
this.
All-Star week, and maybe I give an extra week before NBA playoffs start.
Mm-hmm.
But I add or maybe you shift it.
So you push the calendar back a little bit.
I push the calendar and extend it a little bit. Now, here's the thing of like, are we allowed to add games to the calendar, player rights, player support, and all these other things that are
That's something
important.
that has to be negotiated in the next CBA.
Correct. So it would have to be
happen.
negotiated and worked out. But if there's a way that a team in the NBA can quote unquote win a treble, that would be sick, right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't have trebles in other sports in the US. You don't have that in the US. That is a big thing in European soccer that is literally historic. People look at teams that win trebles, quadruples as the greatest of all time. Can we create a clearer definition of NBA teams that are quote unquote the greatest of all time beyond their record? Because when you look at debates between the greatest of all time, Golden State Warriors, Chicago Bulls, right, etc., they look at their season record and consistency. How can you create something that you're going to really be able to see this team is clearly the greatest because they won all 3 tournaments? And when do you have that first NBA treble? That's my interesting storyline.
I think in terms of what you're talking about with creating that sort of a who's the best of all time, that's hard to judge with a new tournament.
Correct.
I mean?
No, well, it is hard to judge with a new tournament, but I'm saying like if there was a team, if they had this from point 1, it would be a lot clearer to see, because if the Chicago Bulls went and won every single thing possible, it's so much clearer.
I guess my point was that if they started that now, it would take years to.
Oh yes, I'm looking like 125 years down the line.
when we're both gone, maybe
yes.
We'll see what medicine does. I don't think I would want to live that long, though. To be honest,
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
If I had a lot of grandkids, I'd do it.
Yeah,
that's my only take. That's a really weird statement, but
no, that's not weird at all. I mean, you want to see your family succeed and do well.
Weird in the context of the podcast. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, no, maybe a little bit. That's just an interesting sidebar. Okay, so we were talking about the NBA and if they could do this style of a tournament, but what about the NFL? Is the NFL too Americanized to pull off this kind of an international tournament? Because I think so.
I think it is. The simple answer is yes, right? I think the NBA could do an international style tournament with the, I guess you could say, quote unquote, 2 to 4 regions of our world and make it really cool. And that honestly works better than the idea that I threw out there.
I don't know. That was pretty good. USA versus Europe.
The USA, that's what I'm saying, right? The USA versus Europe, but you also, I feel, because of their demographic and the player representation and how strong of an interest they have in China and Japan, right, in that growing community, I think you also have to include Asia and Africa, in my opinion.
That does factor into it, is what does the composition of your league look like?
Yes.
Because the NHL could have had Germany if they had enough players to do it, because Germany wanted to be in this 4 Nations tournament.
Well, I
And
think
they
there's a
just,
lot more countries that would want to be in a Four Nations tournament, right?
yeah, exactly. They just simply didn't have the numbers within the league itself.
Correct. And that's where the problems come.
Right. And you can't really open it up to beyond the league because that kind of defeats the purpose, and then it's just straight up the international tournament that happens every year or the Olympics. And that's not really the point
No,
of the
it's
whole
not.
thing. And that kind of defeats your branding in it. So it does have to be kind of league centric, but I don't think the NFL has enough international players to pull it off at all. And they're in the process of building their international programs. I know NFL in Africa is now a thing where they're trying to build football over there, and they're really trying to branch out worldwide, Brazil, etc. So that could be a thing in the future, but certainly where it's at right now, I don't see that working.
Yes, I 100% agree. I don't see the NFL being able to do it, but if they were to, and this is where the interesting part comes in, right? If the NFL is really invested in making football an Olympic sport, they need to invest in programs that are going to encourage players that might be American born but of other countries' descent to possibly commit to representing those other countries in these platforms, right?
Yeah.
And that's where it can become really interesting where if the NFL does that, it doesn't have the guarantee, but there's a possibility where you can start to grow these things. So let's, for example,
that's what the World Baseball Classic does. Like
exactly.
I remember. So that's every 4 years, just like the Olympics. But I remember being a little kid. Obviously a Red Sox fan. Xander Bogaerts was probably my favorite shortstop. He would go play for the Netherlands every time the World Baseball Classic would happen.
And that's awesome. Like that's just so cool.
Yeah, exactly. And it almost helps you identify with the players a little bit more as a fan because you kind of understand where they come from a little bit more, and you can learn more about their life because those stories get featured in that type of a tournament.
Yes, so I think it would be an NFL infrastructural change where maybe it's not. The change isn't where they're sourcing their athletes, but instead is in the athlete identification with their country. And maybe they're like, oh, my grandmother is from like Gambia and I love my grandmother and that culture is so important to me. I want to be a part of that. And now they have a tie to Gambia and maybe that leads to them doing some really cool things based in Gambia, right? Or for them as a Gambian. I don't know if that's the right phrase. I really hope I didn't get it wrong. Don't get me canceled.
It sounded right. It sounded right to me, but I don't know. I don't think that's something that you can Google. I don't think you can Google how to pronounce that. But I don't know.
If this was to lead to something where an NFL athlete is going and actively building a school in the Gambia as a country, like that would be awesome, right? Sadio Mane I believe Sadio Mane is Senegalese and he's a soccer player. He uses his millions to build up his community in his town. Yeah, and that is so amazing. We see those storylines in the NFL with small town America. How can we make that international? And that's really an interesting way where the NFL can capitalize on personal brands to build their brand. And that's something that I can think could be really strong. Now, is it going to take time to do it? Yes. But if they want to see it become an Olympic sport, if they want to see more international engagement, you have to have players want to invest in these international communities and build that. And that'll be really interesting.
Absolutely. It's the investment, right? That's really the point is they need to get, I guess, I don't want to say worldwide buy-in, but there just needs to be more investment on the part of players who are coming from or have heritage from, other countries. And then that takes a while, that takes a while to set up.
Well, I think for
that
this
kind of a culture
feature to work in the NFL is going to be something that takes another 50 to 75 years for it to
It's
really
not
work.
going to be immediate. Like we're not talking about seeing this in 2030.
No, it's really going to be something that's going to take change and a differentiated strategy from NFL franchises specifically because we're looking at a franchise focused sport.
Yeah, no, definitely. All right. Do you have anything else about the state of All-Star games or the Four Nations tournament? Because I think I'm pretty all set on this.
I want to say just in conclusion, currently we love an all-star game. I love seeing who do we think opinionized census, who is the best player in the league, who are the best players in the league. And I like that we do that voting.
And creating new matchups. I think that was the point of this whole tournament was we had never seen some of these matchups before. And honestly, it created some new storylines for players. Like you think about the USA-Canada final game, Connor McDavid scoring that overtime goal. He had never really, the knock on him was he hadn't won the big one, right?
Mm.
Well, he scored the overtime goal to win them the championship in the first ever Four Nations tournament. So you're creating new storylines. And when you create new storylines around All-Star games, you highlight the best parts of your league.
Yes.
And in turn, that's what gets you fans, right? People want to be able to feel like they're connecting with what the bones of your league are or who the stars of your league are. And that's why this really matters.
Yes. I think, Paul, that's a great way to close it and a great way to say it. All-star games need to grow. They need to change. New storylines need to be made because you're trying to win new fans and new demographics in really interesting ways. And if
it's evolution.
It's evolution, right? The NHL has done a great job of it here, and we're really excited to see what next year's Four Nations tournament looks like and how that continues to grow.
I believe it's not every year.
It's not every year?
I don't think so.
That's kind of heartbreaking, but it makes so much sense. So will they go back to having an all-star game next year?
And I'm gonna
look what are they going to do with that time space?
I've heard different things. They're going to bring this back after.
They should bring it back, especially if it had the second best viewership in the last 10 years.
Yeah, after the success that it had, this isn't going to be a one-off thing. Okay, the NHLPA says every 2 years.
Okay, every 2 years makes sense. I'm here for that. 2 years. A bit more style like an international tournament. I like that. So the next time it's back, I'm excited to see what they do, how it grows, how it changes. Does the league change and do the countries that are involved in it change? I don't know.
I believe probably they do. We'll see, not to get political or anything, but we'll see what happens internationally. But the only reason that Russia wasn't in this tournament was because they're in the war with Ukraine right now. And let's say that stops in 6 months or whatever. By the time the next Four Nations comes around, they could be in it,
Right, they could. But also, what does that mean? How do they expand it to 6 teams? Do they expand it? Try to expand it to 8? Right? Does the players exist for that? Or is there an American player with German heritage that can be convinced to say, I'm going to play for Germany. I'll never play for the U.S. Let's do it. Yeah.
Right.
Can that happen? Does that storyline exist?
I think it does. I do think that's the next evolution of it where, we saw just players from one country or another playing for their countries. But I do think the next step is expanding it to family heritage so you can allow more of the world to be involved and collaborate on it.
Yes, 100%. So yeah, I think really, do we want to see the NBA try to do this? Yeah, I think it'd be great. Do we want to see the NHL invest in something the NFL invest in something like this? Yes, it'd be great. Can the MLS invest in something like this? Probably not, unless it's MLS specific. So maybe they could, and that would be interesting. But
you don't think so? Why not?
Because so many international tournaments for soccer exist already, and the international break schedule is already available. I don't think it offers something interesting or new. Well, I just don't think it offers something interesting or new to the international sporting scene.
Yeah.
In these other sports where they're a bit US centric, right? Especially with the NFL and NBA, there's a lot of international sporting growth that can be made that doesn't really exist in soccer because it's more of an international sport.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And we can debate about, where those leagues rank in terms of international reach.
Yes.
But I think it's pretty obvious that the NFL wouldn't have enough international influence to have that kind of tournament right now, like we talked about. But, maybe the NBA does develop something. We'll see. But
key point is
we're
right
going
now.
in circles right now.
Key point is right now. It can change.
But let me put it this way. We're at an exciting exciting time in All-Star Game history because it is constantly going to be changing over the next several years.
Yes. Perfect.
All right. Let's talk about Man U.
Okay, next topic. Man United is recently been not taken over. Ineos bought a minority stake in Man United. They have cut 400 employees in the last 8 months.
Of how many did they start with?
They started with around 1,408.
Okay.
Now, recognizably, that is a lot. But we want to talk about this topic mostly because it's so important to understand the infrastructure of how how sporting clubs work, what is sustainable, and how do you really offer great support to your employees while also maintaining that you need to be financially stable, right?
Yeah. I guess my first question my first thought on this is I think people don't realize the amount of people that it takes to go into producing a professional sports game. You know what I mean? I remember when I was with the Sea Dogs, I was surprised at how many people worked there for a minor league game.
Mm,
I mean, I would guess, I don't know the exact number, but I would guess we probably had 100 people on staff. You know what I mean?
100%.
Um, and you scale that up to a Man United. Doesn't surprise me that they have 1,400 people, or they
No.
had 1,400 people on staff. So uh, it is kind of a big deal, though. It becomes a big deal when you lay off like 30% of your workers. So in terms of their financial stability, I guess the question that I wanted to ask you was, does that have to do with their signings in their current roster? And is that why they're having a hard time balancing it?
So I think the really hard thing is, and we could talk about player salaries and all this, and Man United probably overpays in a lot of ways for player salaries. Man U, for the last, probably since 2013, so for the last 10 to 12 years, has made really, really, really challenging. I'm going to use the word challenging instead of horrible, but challenging financial decisions, right? Where they're signing players for way more than they could probably afford based on their performance, right? They haven't been a top competitor in the league table. They've been clearly on a decline, and they pay players top dollar, right? Now, Man United still earns through media and other ways, right? They are one of the top earners in the world because it's still one of the biggest clubs in the world, right? There's no doubt
Yeah.
about that.
Like you do think of, when you think of soccer, you do think of the Man United brand,
Yes.
that's top of mind,
It is right, and it's because it's a brand, right?
Yeah.
So it has the most media coverage possibly of any club in England, right? Just like Bayern Munich does in Germany, Barcelona or Real Madrid do in Spain, and PSG does in France, right? So it's super interesting to see. And the hard part is of this is probably the right decision from Ineos, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but really a difficult decision because this is 400 people losing their job.
Yeah, it's definitely, as a company, it's one of those decisions that it's not pretty, but you get to that higher level of CEO, etc., and you do have to realize that you do have to do, even though you may like some of the people you work with, you have to do what is in the best interest of the corporation or of the company. And it can be an unfortunate situation sometimes. But I guess my real question is, how did they get so far in debt? You know, 734 million, I believe, right? You said
Yes,
in
734 million, and I fact checked myself, and it said the number I was given was 0.92 billion.
Okay.
So this is where the more interesting question becomes of, yes, they're massively in debt, probably because they have made a lot of poor sporting
Wait,
investments.
0.92 billion would be like 920
20 million, but I don't,
million.
I'm not totally sure, right? That was what Google gave me.
Okay.
So I think in the article I read was 734 million, but
Okay.
Google AI gave me 0.92 billion. So
Yeah.
somewhere
Okay.
in that range, right?
Yeah.
And I think
Still a lot of freaking money.
a lot of freaking money, right? And this is where the real interesting conversation, and this is like kind of different from just the Man United situation specifically. And we might go back and cover these Man United specific details to ask more questions about it. But to answer your question, the question is a sporting investment, is a sporting club or a sporting franchise something you are meant to make money from annually as a owner? Or is it something you're expected to make money from through the business appreciating and growing?
Are
What are
we
your
living
thoughts?
in reality or ideally? Because ideally it should be both. In a perfect world, you want to make more money every year, right? You want to be profitable every year. And then also when you're done, when you feel it's your time to go out of ownership, you want to be able to sell it at a much higher value than you had before. And that is certainly the case in, when you're talking about the sale of sports franchises right now internationally, really. That is certainly the case that, whenever a franchise is being sold, the valuation has soared and continues to appreciate hand over fist every year. So it is one of those appreciating assets that you will get your investment back plus a lot more in the long term.
If you do it right.
if you do it right, yeah. But even if you don't, there's that fan base. Even if you're not a good owner, there's that fan base there that will be loyal to that. If that's a long established brand. So it really, with the making profit every year, that's, I guess, kind of in the competitive spirit of it all, where you say, like, what are my priorities? What do I care about? Do we care about being competitive revenue wise every single year with our cohort that we're in a league with?
True. And I think you make a great statement of you're right. Ideally, it is both, right? But my question is, what do you do with those profits?
Yeah. And I'm going to give a simple answer. It's probably too simple, but it's you invest in whatever is going to make the club the most efficient and provide the most value to the needs that you have or the problems that you have.
Exactly the answer that I was thinking, right? The challenging thing is, for the
That's
last
different
10,
for every
13
club.
years, I believe since 2003, I need to fact check when the Glazer takeover was, when they bought the club. That has not been the case since. What Man United has made, there's a lot of investment made into the club, right? And they spend a good amount of money and a lot of money, but obviously they're $734 million in debt. So if they're still one of the most quote unquote money-making clubs in the world, how are they in this debt? And the reality is the Glazers take money rather than reinvesting and put it in their pockets.
Yeah. So do you think the problem would be solved if they kind of reinvested into something like research and development to make their product better, or like they have such an established brand already that it's hard to say that their marketing is going to get them a ridiculous amount more revenue? But what can they invest in? Can they give their fans a new experience maybe that they haven't had before, and invest in that? Like I was just thinking along the lines of virtual reality. How can they bring like a virtual reality? No, I
know you are,
right
but the immediate thought is virtual reality. Watch Man United win the Premier League. Woo! And that's so fake. That was my immediate thought.
Maybe, yeah, but I mean more of like in a live game sense. Like you're watching the game, but it simulates like you're in the stadium and you're sitting in the front row.
Right.
Like you can simulate that. We have the technology to do that now through virtual reality. So is it investing in something like that and bringing a new experience to their fans, or what do you think they need to invest in to regain some of their year-to-year profit?
So I'm going to be totally real, right? The challenging thing, and I'm not a sporting club or sporting director, nor am I an expert. I think Man United are doing the right thing right now. They are currently cost cutting. They are trying to eliminate unnecessary expenses and identify how they can best grow the club. To be clear, they're 1,404 employees. The comparison from their cross-city competitor, Manchester City, is 681.
Wow.
So they are 800 employees more than the team that won the Champions League last year, who has a massive stadium and a lot of other factors, right?
Do you know what that looks like in terms of dollars, like the translation of that?
I do not, and that's a great question of what that is in their expenses.
Okay.
But I think the clear thing is, well, one, obviously Manchester City are backed by a sheikh. That's A or B, but they have great money backing them. Man United are backed by one of the richest sporting families in the world, the Glazers. Not the Glazers. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. So. Okay, that was like really, I immediately, and this is like totally beeline.
I think your brain just glitched, I think.
My brain glitched of like, I knew I said it right, but it didn't sound right because I'm imagining like a 15-year-old like, Coach, you're glazing. Like, come on, Coach. Like, that's what I'm imagining right now. And that's a crazy statement.
Bro, brain rot has ruined us.
Brain rot has ruined me, but also coaching 9-year-olds is a factual thing.
No, that makes sense. It's not because I know you and I don't watch like we don't brain rot like that. But I could damn sure guarantee you the 9-year-olds are brain rotten for sure. So
yes, but they're one of the richest and most like the Glazers are rich. They do well.
Yeah,
right. They're not sheikh rich, but they're rich, right? So the reality is Man United, yes, needs to cost cut. But the problem I have with this is they're cost cutting in a way where they're eliminating staff support. So factually,
yeah,
and it's ambassador agreement with United's most successful manager, Sir Alex Ferguson, right? I don't see a really problem with that. That's sad, but okay, that's fine. They've removed traditional perks for the rank and file, annual Christmas party, free travel, and accommodation for the FA Cup final. They hiked ticket prices for home games to £66. Now, not super high, but that's in comparison to a U.S. market, so totally different. But most importantly, they're cutting out employee meals. So not for players, but really for employees. Hard. So, and I'm trying to find the quote. This is the quote. Catering at Carrington will be unchanged for the remainder of the season. Carrington is their facility, their staff facility, but is expected to eventually see staff offered only soup and bread with no changes to offering for players.
Man, I can't get behind that. Like as an operational decision, I just can't get behind that.
I 100% agree, right?
How do you expect people to do a good job for you if they're not nourished, number one? And number two, that's just a basic human right. And I'm not saying that every workplace has to have food available for them, but when you have food available for them, to cut it out is really tough. You know, I think that's one of those decisions that you make it, and then you can't come back from it, in the sense that once you make the decision to provide your employees food, you're sticking with that. Like that's right. That becomes an expectation and a company value that people think about when they sign up to be a part of your organization. Like, oh, I'm not going to have to make my lunch at home, or, you know, spend $15 to get a sandwich or whatever, you know, during my lunch hours. So that's great that they're, you know, at least providing me the opportunity to get some food. I'm sorry, my lighting's changing. Okay. These things are on a motion sensor, so I've been sitting here for too long. But I really can't see the justification of, is this the thing that really had to go? You couldn't have found something else, you know, like you can't even provide your employees food. I don't know. That's just my take on it. Maybe it's just because I'm like very food centric, but I don't know.
As are a lot of Americans and myself as well, right? And I agree with you, Paul. I can't get behind this, right? The reality is, yes, cutting staff is a good call, right? You are clearly a bloated organization that has too many people on staff and needs to minimize expenses by streamlining and increasing efficiency. But while you're increasing efficiency, you also need to increase athlete and staff support, whether it be through mental health and wellness, right? All these other factors are still so important. I actually talked to an ex-player care and support manager at Man United today, who's now with Orlando City. My camera went away, but we're still...
No, I got you.
We're still thinking that this is so important, and Ineos isn't valuing how they offer staff support. And that's the fact of, if you're having a staff or a...
So what was hearing that first person perspective from that person like?
And I think it's challenging because I didn't want to ask too many questions and ask her to just like diss her former
spill all the secrets.
Right. But she did. What I was told was that Ineos did not value player health and mental and player wellness and support. Right. And I'm not going to say that if that's true or not. I can't speak for Ineos. But clearly here they're saying this is an area where we can cut, but that's a massive place of staff support. And the real thought is, Paul, and I think you kind of said it, do you have to pay people more to work for your organization when you're actively stripping away support systems for them to work for your organization?
Yeah. You know, I do understand from a business perspective, sometimes hard decisions have to be made, but I gotta think there's just got to be another way. You know, I think you can always find another way. You can always find a creative solution to a problem, and that's just a belief that I have. But this isn't a creative solution to a problem. This is just them dumping an easy source of cash flow, it's an easy source of expenses. Really, what do they say to their employees about this? You know, have they said, okay, now you're going to bring your own lunch, or, you know, we'll give you a stipend every day to go get something from, you know, the local Nando's or whatever is in the UK. I'm surprised I pulled that reference out.
That's actually like so class. You have to understand, so class.
Yeah, because we don't have those here, but Maybe
We have
they
peri
just-
peri sauce, but no Nando's.
What the hell is peri peri sauce?
I believe peri peri sauce is a sauce from Nando's.
Okay, so there. Okay, so I had half of the reference.
Let's
But-
see.
I guess
I'm googling this right now because I think it's a great bit.
okay.
Yeah, Nando's has it's a hot sauce of sorts, but it's a
Okay.
peri peri sauce is a sauce at Nando's.
Like the UK version of Chick-fil-A sauce.
Yes. Yes.
All right. I think that's I guess the extent of that line of thought for me in terms of the food.
No, 100%. And I think clearly they're still offering food, but in the form of soup and bread. And I think
Yeah,
really
I guess
what
I
that-
forgot about that part.
what that feels and communicates what, right?
Depression.
Yes, it feels and communicates the Great Depression, right?
Yeah.
And I think obviously, well, when you're $0.92 billion in debt, yeah, maybe you are in a Great Depression and you need to
As a
rework some
company, yeah.
things. But I think let's also be real here. If we are running sporting organizations, it is so important to understand our teams, value our staff, and support them effectively. That's going to help them do the best job and actually factually probably going to make you more money. And I think from Man United's perspective, you are, as we just suggested, going to have to pay people more money to work for you because you are not offering these support systems.
Yeah.
People are not going to want to come and work for you when you are not offering a positive, beneficial, and growing culture. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how Ineos develop in this Man United space. And
I also think they're going to have a tough time hiring when they just laid off 400 people.
100%. Well, I also think
Who's going to want to go into an unstable situation like that?
correct. Now, from that perspective, I don't think they should be hiring right now. If they are, and honestly, they probably are because they're Man United and they're a massive club, right? I wouldn't feel comfortable with it either, right? I wouldn't want to do that. I wouldn't want to be part of that. The culture feels toxic. It feels bad. It feels like I don't feel supported. Now, obviously, I don't know all these things about Man United, right? I've never worked there. I don't know the background. I don't know what Ineos are doing in the inner workings. But I know for a fact that there are many people where the club is not connected that are in the higher management staff where Sir Jim Ratcliffe walks in to the women's training facility and doesn't know who the club captain is. That's an easy media training thing. And when you're the most mediaized club in all of England, to an extent, right? And that could be factually debated, but let's say they are. They're
certainly among the top ones.
Right. You need to be media trained for these situations. And you have to understand we are highly publicized and we need to prepare for these things. And I think the worst thing here, and this is where I'll leave it because I know we're almost in an hour and I'm pretty much just ranting about Man United being idiotic at times. Ineos and Man United need to properly understand their situation of, yes, we're in a financial ruins. The roof of Old Trafford literally has a waterfall.
Yeah.
Right? Have you seen that, Paul?
I think I've seen a clip of it, yeah.
It literally has a waterfall.
Yeah.
Yes, that's fact. We need to make cuts. Yes, that's fact. Do we cut player and staff support? No. Do we cut player and staff meals? Probably not. It's not a good idea. Do we not train for publicized situations that are going to be publicized?
No.
No. We train for publicized situations, right?
Yeah.
Media training in sports is so important.
I guess maybe there just could have been a different evaluation of what does need to be cut is I guess the moral of the story. And I do think like we're talking about, it's not even necessarily that you cut the 400 jobs. It's more like the message behind that and the message behind the cutting of food specifically.
Yes.
That is a little troublesome for people, not only within the organization, but who would be interested in going there.
Yeah, 100%. So it'll be interesting to see if you're following sports business, follow Man United, and it's probably to see what not to do, not to see what to do at the moment. And hopefully that'll change, but only time will tell.
So
that feels like such a negative thing to end on. I'm so mad at myself.
I know, and I'm not going to end that way. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think the solution is? Is there a blanket solution? Is there a couple of different things that they could do? Like what are the positive steps that they can take?
I think Man United are on a really long journey. And this is going to be really challenging. They need to reevaluate what their standing is. And 1 point more investment probably isn't going to turn them around. And a lot of people would say like improved athletic performance and improved performance on the field is going to turn them around. Sure, they'll make a lot more money. But also, right, they're already $734 million in debt. That is something that's really hard to overcome. And you need to really reassess how you are spending your money to make sure you're doing it right. So I don't think there's a blanket solution. I think Ineos is doing the right thing in cutting costs and trying to streamline and improve effectiveness, right? That's something that people do when they're trying to improve efficiency of a business. Is it always the best idea?
Oh, yeah.
No, we don't know how it goes. We don't know how this will go for Ineos.
It's funny. I heard my intro to law professor say the other day, what's the first thing that happens when a new CEO takes over?
Cuts.
And yeah, we all said hirings and firings. And, that is exactly what happens. And you're right. It's a process. And, they're in the middle of that process right now. We'll see how they deal with it. But definitely something that it'll be interesting to see how they kind of try to turn the franchise around and what they do invest in and what they decide to not invest in anymore.
Yes.
That's the game of strategy that you play when you're working in the sports business world.
Of course. But follow this story. It's worth knowing what's right to do and what's wrong to do. And learning from case studies like how Man United is being run right now is so important.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening. We appreciate it. Unfortunately, we had to end on that depressing note that I may cut some of out. We'll see.
100% should. I'm so the color commentary guy, and it's so clear.
No, I don't know about that. I mean, I leaned on you a lot today. I'm hitting my wall right now. You know how I said I didn't need an energy drink at the beginning? I'm currently hitting my wall in the day where I realized I didn't get enough sleep. So
Paul's like, I need a nap, guys.
No, I don't need a nap. I need an energy drink. I need a rain right now.
A good 200 milligrams of caffeine will lift you up.
For sure. Yeah, that would
maybe
get me going.
Maybe at the end of this podcast too. We don't know.
That would get me going, and then doing the editing and graphics after. All right. Well, thank you guys for listening. You can hear us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Music as well. Well, Apple Podcasts. And go check out our socials, sbt.podcast on Instagram and sbt.pod20 on TikTok and Twitter. Thank you guys as always. Have a great week, and we will see you next time.
Yeah.
Okay, boom.